So I'm still outside the football stadium, but just behind me here is a school, and the children were playing in the playground when I arrived, and I just wanted to point out something, that this school has laws that it has to follow. For example, very simply, you cannot serve poisonous pizzas in the canteen here. You cannot serve toxic drinks. Likewise, there's probably extremely strict regulations about gas. So it would be impossible for there to be a gas leak here and blow a huge hole in the earth. So schools function with rules as well. In fact, of course, across life, we have rules everywhere. So I'm just doing this to point out the blind spot that we have in terms of laws and rules for environmental things. So we accept rules for schools, we accept them for football stadiums, but really we don't have them for planetary boundaries. And you may say, well, that's kind of a bit implausible, the environment, how do you regulate things for the environment? Well, there are many ways you can do it. And the Climate Academy advocates for laws because it's one of the few leverage points that remain in the system for systemic change. So, of course, the Climate Academy is not against individual actions. We're not against doing everything that we can at an individual level to exit this crisis. And if enough people did that, it would indeed be a tipping point. But there are ways in which you can deal with the climate crisis from the top down, and that is through laws. So let's just take a moment to think about laws. There are essentially two ways you can do this. One is through parliamentary laws, laws voted by governments. Of course, this requires education, it requires a lot of background civic energy to mobilize people to vote for MPs who then vote for those laws. So this is, of course, doable. I know very well that the tide at the moment is generally against environmental action, but there is a project called the 89% Project, which establishes that actually most people want more climate and environmental protections. It's just that the 89% is hidden or camouflaged or masked by the very noisy people who are against climate or against climate action. And they tend to be on the far right of the political spectrum. So there is a way in which you can establish protections by law, and that goes through. There is another way, and that is through human rights law. So Leipzig here was bombed by the British in World War II. The city was leveled to rubble, just like so many other German cities like Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, and so on. And a rebuilding had to take place, not just in Germany, but at a global level. And after World War II, what we had was human rights. The United Nations was born. So we are capable of imagining laws and imagining frameworks which underpin human life and which are global in their scope. And these laws are rooted in human rights. So this is another way in which we can leverage climate action. And in fact, many countries, like in Holland, for example, you have the agenda, a successful movement that got laws installed in the Dutch statute book on climate. Denmark has also had them. And there are many different ways in which you can do climate legislation underpinned by human rights. Now, of course, I can't give a lecture on all the different variations on that, but it's just to point at the fact that we can actually deal with this problem at a systemic level through legislation. And this legislation is powerful, really powerful, because it's the background matrix to everything else. So just like in a football pitch, you have governing laws which rule behavior and put limits on things. Surely, in terms of climate and in terms of resource extractions, we have to be doing the same kind of thing. Not because we're mean, not because we're miserable, not because, we want to corrupt happiness or anything like that, but simply because it's common sense. Because without it, you just have people running off with the ball, and that's not fun for anybody.